So oftentimes people have looked at metta. Even students sometimes who have been practicing metta, again, there's different ways of practicing metta. Even well-known teachers, when they talk about metta, it's again that formulaic following of a certain statements. So it's very verbal, cognitive. So you never really get to turn it into a visceral, into a feeling-based, bodily feeling-based, experiential phenomenon for you, which is very, very real. Now, in every aspect of your life, you want to feel. Let's say when you see your loved one, when you come back from work, let's say, you are not thinking about seeing them. How great it is, let's say, to see them at that moment when you are seeing them and your heart about to burst in your heart, in your lungs, in your chest, of so much happiness. Is it? You're not thinking those joyful feelings. What are you doing? You are feeling how great it feels to see my daughter, my son, my wife, my husband, my grandmother. We feel first in that sense. Now, when it comes to meditation, because we stay away from trying to formulate things, add things, thoughts, concepts. Concepts are things we have to relinquish, in fact. So sometimes people go ahead and you do this also with different types of techniques as well. Because the brain is a chatterbox. You just keep going non-stop. You go to sleep, it's still going almost. And then you wake up, it's like, it's still going. The only time it goes is when the person is dead. So many people think, but it still goes until it finds a new birth. Yesterday I was mentioning to students, it's called upadinna. Upadinna is grabbing a new body. A new body. And that's what a human being, that's what we always do at the moment of death. So there's a lot of thinking involved, unfortunately. So for that, Lord Buddha, especially with him being so advanced of a meditator, when he was, before he became a Buddha, as a Bodhisattva, what did he do? What technique did he do? The technique that every Buddha has used to become a Buddha, which is Anapana. But why? Because it's so simple. But it has many nuances to it. Many nuances to it. Now, why do I prefer Metta over Anapana? Although I have to say, I have students who practice Anapana. Also, I have students who practice different technique, but they all started with Metta. Why? Remember that bit about feeling? When you smile, what is happening? When you're really smiling, feel like smiling. When you're walking on freshly cut grass, what is happening with your bare feet? I already see some smiles on your face. You feel it. Now, unfortunately, there is the misinformation or miscommunication that Metta is not going to take you to Nibbana. It's something good you do so that you feel good at the end of the retreat. You go home, you're okay. It's a nice feeling, and that's the end. And that would be true if you don't read or listen to Lord Buddha giving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times metta to meditators. But especially when you read the Karaniya Mettā Sutta. At the end verses, Lord Buddha says, a person who fully practices metta will never come to any mother's womb again. Who does that? Where does that happen? An Arahant. Lord Buddha had a way with words sometimes. He was very poetic. The person will never attain anything less than Arahantship, or at least Nibbana, meaning that person will never come back to any type of birth again. But we are impatient sometimes, and I understand that. That's okay. Sometimes we have to practice different techniques, and that's fine. But I need us to be very aware of the Dhamma portion of that, because in Asia and also in the West, I've seen this, where they put down metta. Oh, we do satipatthana, we don't do metta. We are now graduated to satipatthana, for example. I've heard this from certain vipassana groups. It's only those few minutes that we need to practice. We don't need more. Well, that's not what Lord Buddha talked about and what he taught. Lord Buddha was the embodiment of metta. Well, how can you become an embodiment of something? You practice. And it will take you deep. It will take you deeper than many of the other techniques. Let me tell you that. Based on not just my own life, because whatever I teach, I come from my life. I've practiced Anapana for over 20 years. 20 years. But I've also, most importantly, maybe it was my thing, I would say, maybe it had just happened for me. I've also seen it in students who switch and they really grow fast, faster than anything. Hence, Lord Buddha was giving that technique to many people who have never sat down and tried to analyze, because they are farmers, they are carpenters, they make clay, they make pottery, the king, he doesn't have time to sit and, courtesan, the king's courtesans. He would just give them techniques on metta, all of a sudden, you have a sotapanna courtesan. Unfortunately, she couldn't continue that kind of a lifestyle. She had to be like a wife. So we have many examples. So I wanted to say this because a few questions came up today when in the private interviews, and I wanted to address it. And also some of the things that I have witnessed in my travels during the past few months in different parts of the world. So I just wanted to say that whatever technique you're using, always bring your attention to the one thing that is the most important thing. I mentioned this in yesterday's talk. If you narrow down the Dhamma into one thing, what could it be? Sometimes people say this, that, whatever, but if you narrow it down, you come to sati. That's the most bottom line. You cannot practice sila without sati. You cannot practice metta without sati. Now, do you see why I say that metta and satipatthana are one and the same? If you're doing metta correctly, according to Lord Buddha. Otherwise, you're just devotional. It's called bhakti. There's bhakti yoga. Indian methods of yoga, things like bhakti yoga, devotional. You go into Sufism, you say you have the same thing. Emotion. When people talk about, Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, this and that, even Buddhists. Well, I say, yes, it's lovely, but it will not get you deeper or higher than some of the Rupa Lokas. We have a chart of the, later on, perhaps we can show you online, 31 layers of existence. It won't get you any higher than that. But Lord Buddha would teach us things that would allow us to break free, to cut loose from the cycle of 31 layers of existence, to be reborn in any of these. Now, what about metta? Well, with metta also, the affection, that's a danger we have. That's why yesterday when we were talking about the Vimansaka Sutta, Lord Buddha says the good teacher is going to teach you the dark side and the dark and white areas, sides of your process, of your growth, meaning the dangers, how to avoid falling into the trap. I have met students who would, after I interview, that's why it's necessary to be interviewed. In our Q&A, I see that they're practicing affection. And that's not Dhamma, that's not sati, that doesn't have sati. That's why I also talk about having the 6 R's or the 5 R's, depending on how you look at it, to have that relaxed step. When you're coming back, when you saw a hindrance, you don't immediately, the moment you recognize there was a hindrance, oh, I was dozing off, oh, it was tinamida, it was sloth and torpor, you come back to the object. That's good that you're back, but you should have gotten a few flowers along the way. Meaning, don't go outside and get flowers, but when you recognize it, immediately check. That is where the sati is going to take you to panya. Meaning, when you recognize it, oh, I was distracted, you immediately also check in. There is a tightness in the brain, there's a tightness in the throat, or there's a tightness in some part of your body because of the thing that got you to go in the first place, which is tanha, craving something other than me being on my meditation object. That is what we call distraction. Uddhacca, restlessness, distraction. So I was mentioning to a good student today how in order for me to take something in my hands, and I have something else in my hand, what do I have to do? I have to put that thing down and pick the new thing up. That transaction of putting down the thing I should be holding and picking up something else is tanha. Now, do you get to see what we're saying? Craving goes out. It's always thirsty. That's what tanha is. In Sanskrit, it's trishna. Thirsty, always thirsty, like an alcoholic. We have a brain that is alcoholic, or a mind. We always want. So to be able to be satisfied with, no, I'm going to sit in meditation in this object, and that's it, whatever it is. And then you notice the distraction. There was a craving. I recognize that I'm distracted, but there was a craving. I see it now. And if there's craving, there's what? There's this. When we look at Paticca Samuppada, what do we see? Craving, and then comes what? Grabbing, upadana. So they go hand in hand. It's not like craving you have and upadana stays at home. No, they come together. They're like this. So if you have craving, you also have upadana. Upadana, what does it do? It tightens you even more, physically this time. If the brain is tight, craving, it also will have tightness manifested somewhere in the body. I mentioned for years that my tightness was around my jaw. But I couldn't know that for years, decades, until I actually saw the tightness that is happening in the brain. There's extra blood activity, circulation, agitation in the mind every time we have a thought. Every time you think, the brain has to be put into action. But how? The postal service of the body is the blood circulation. So if anything gets to be done, it needs to be moved with the help of the blood. But especially when you're dealing with the brain. Even when we have craving. So the mind dictates and the brain follows. The mind dictates and the brain follows. Well, the brain is part of the body. The body then follows. Do you see the connection? Now, it becomes clearer when you're practicing, and you're seeing this in your practice. So when you recognize your mind is distracted and then you see the craving, you're loosening it up, you're releasing. And then you're relaxing the body more. And then in my case, as I mentioned, it was the jaw. I was like, oh boy, it felt like it was a car I was holding on my neck like this. It was, wow, I rested and relaxed more. And then suddenly, that natural relief that follows, because tanha and upadana were dropped, suddenly I can't help but be joyful. Even if it's a very brief time, your facial muscles, if they're relaxed, naturally they will start smiling. So it's not mentally, otherwise it's faking, and that's not, the Dhamma is not fake. And then, you see the flowers that you got now? And then you return, you slide naturally. It's like, ever been on a slide as a child? And you go up and then you slide, and it's like right at the end, it feels, you slide back into your meditation object. If it's metta, it's metta. If it's breath, it's the breath. If it's body sensation, it's body sensation. If it's maranasati, death contemplation, it's death contemplation. So you come back. So I wanted to say these words to help you also, because I noticed certain unifying themes in the interviews. So I wanted to address, because I know there are teachers, especially in Asia now, or even online, that are thankfully teaching Satipatthana, everyone, in different places in Germany, in US, in Asia, several. So, and traditionally, commentarially, and we owe this to Venerable Buddhaghosa, unfortunately, the separation. You have the whole Vipassana Mahasi tradition, even in Burma, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and on, especially when it was introduced to the rest of the world, especially West, Metta was looked upon as something less than. Because even though he mentions it in the Visuddhimagga about Metta, but it is nothing compared to the dry Vipassana that they turned it into. The Abhidhamma Pitaka, for example. These were later developments. When you look into suttas, you do not see that. And that's why when we say Theravada, I always like to hear more when someone introduces themselves as Theravada. I like to ask a few more questions, usually in the form of, what is it that you refer back to as the teachings? And when they mention 5 words, and out of those 5 words, there's 4 or 3 commentaries, I know they're not talking about the original teachings of Lord Buddha. They're talking about commentaries. So you have the suttas, and then over time, you had different layers of commentators, non-practicing individuals, usually philosophers and scholars, who were so full of data about this, about this, about that, about this sutta, and also formulating new books. Yesterday, I was talking about the Mangala Sutta, yes. Mangala Sutta originally had only a few books in it. That's why it was called the shorter discourses. Khuddaka Nikaya, it was called. Sutta Nipata is part of that. But over time, it ended up having more than 20. The late Venerable Dhamma Buddha, Bhante Dhamma Buddha, who passed away, he was also very upset about this. So he would tell people, you don't believe me? Go to India, check out the pillars of Emperor Ashoka. Emperor Ashoka listed how many Nikayas have how many books. Guess how many you find in Khuddaka Nikaya? Dhammapada, Sutta Nipata, Theragata, Therigata. What did I leave out? There's one more. Now, Udana and Itivuttaka. That's it. But today you have books on ghosts. You have books on the past lives of Buddhas, And it's a library, just that portion. Buddha Vamsa, they called. I don't think the camera is picking it up, but it's pretty big. And that is only one of the books. So what I'm trying to say is the ridiculousness of people who sit down and don't practice but have a very creative mind. Now, if you are the one with the mic, and every tradition starts taking that on, you move away from what the suttas are saying. That's why Bhante Dhammavudho was staunchly for teaching from the suttas. And he was fortunately not the only one. Bhante Punnaji was as well. And they were the two key figures, I think. And they were influencing me. And that's why I do the project that I'm doing now with retranslation of the suttas, originals. Now, when you're reading the suttas and then someone comes and talks about meditation through the language of Venerable Buddhaghosa, that's a problem. Because in the end of the book, even Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga, you see that he did not attain any of the things that he talks about. So why should I believe him? Let me go to the suttas. Another great mind who was persecuted and died recently, I might have mentioned him yesterday, was Bhante Jnanananda, Katukurunde Jnanananda, who wrote the incredibly, well, a library of books, first of all. But he was a Theravadan monk. He used to wear the same kind of robe colors. In Sri Lanka, born in a Buddhist nation, a Buddhist monk who became a monk in not just as a child, but by choice, later in the university. And then you see with such wisdom, he had discovered also that it's the suttas. But guess how he was treated? He was looked down upon. At the end, he died in a small kuti under a rock. So what I'm trying to say is, to create change is necessary at this. It's not creating change. We're just pointing the camera back to where it's supposed to be. So unfortunately, the majority of the teachers, the well-known teachers in the world, unless they're coming straight from the sutta, they are talking from the commentaries. So it is your job to discover what is it that they are teaching. It's before you practice anything, including this. See if Bhante Candana's teaching is matching the suttas or not. You don't have to become an expert, no. If I'm saying this sutta and that sutta, that's why I always quote suttas. Then go and check that sutta if what I'm saying matches that sutta. Make sense? Good.